One of Araki's greatest regrets when looking back at Phantom Blood was not expanding on the friendly rivalry between Jonathan and Dio. He said that they didn't have that type of relationship, though he did expand a little bit on this rivalry that he wanted in their slight teenage years before they got more serious again. Araki also said that he was a little disappointed in the relationship between Jonathan and William, as they came off as more of a father and son friendship instead of like two actual friends. To mend this disappointment, Araki crafted the character Caesar Antonio Zeppeli for part 2. Did Caesar work out?
どうせ女でも作っていい気に暮らしてんだろ。見つけ出してぶっ殺してやる。
As I've mentioned before, and as Araki mentioned before in the Jejonium Volume 6, he created Caesar Zeppeli specifically for the point of creating a character to have a friendly rivalry with the new lead JoJo. Though before we get too into that, we should understand the meaning behind Caesar's name. Now I'll just be covering the name Caesar, that being his first name, because his middle name is just a reference to William, and his last name I've already covered in the Lineage of the Zeppeli video. So a lot of people are under the assumption that Caesar gets his name from the Roman politician Gaius Julius Caesar. Though there's really no connection between Caesar Zeppeli and Julius Caesar, besides the fact that Caesar Zeppeli was introduced in Rome and Julius Caesar ruled Rome, and that they both die, which I find to be a pretty weak connection. Where their name are most likely taken from is the Led Zeppelin 1977 tour plane Caesar's Chariot. Caesar's Chariot was a former United Airlines Boeing 720 passenger jet, which was hired by Led Zeppelin for their 1977 tour around North America from Caesar's Palace Casino. This is because their original plane, the Starship, was permanently grounded at the Long Beach airport with engine difficulties. Caesar's Chariot is said to have made Led Zeppelin's tour around North America so much easier than they were ever imagining it could be, and after they returned it to Caesar's Palace, it was later bought by Davis Montaigne Air Force Base, and its parts was used to maintain their jets. So basically, Caesar's Chariot and Caesar Zeppeli had basically the same purpose overall. They were both selected because the original plan fell through. Their whole purpose was to elevate and carry the real stars, and that after their purpose was finished, they were disassembled and their remaining parts were used to make other things greater. As we see in the story, Caesar not only forced Joseph to evolve his techniques of Hamon, such as learning the points in which he should release Hamon, or creating the clacker volley technique, which Joseph only created so he could keep up with Caesar. Not to mention that Caesar's entire purpose is to literally ease Joseph's journey as he becomes a stronger fighter, as Caesar is seen literally pulling Joseph up at multiple occasions to his level. You see this at the filler Pillar of Death in training, where we also have Caesar literally pulling Joseph up out of danger when he was fighting cars, and finally in his final moments he gives Joseph a literal boost in power through his blood bubble. Design-wise, Caesar had many outfits throughout the entirety of Part 2, the first being the most important, which was a magician-esque outfit with a top hat to clue us into his family origin. Though most of the outfits that he wears throughout the rest of Part 2 don't really play too much into his character, though I felt like pointing out the first one was important given its connection to William. Caesar does maintain a few things throughout his entire character design. You have his two strange marks under his eyes.
The Caesar has marked you for death, and the Legion obeys. Ready yourself for battle.
Which Araki forgets to draw half the time. Then you have his headband with a row of tessellated monotonal triangles, which the colors shift between purple and black, or if you're a filthy anime only, purple and orange. And finally, the two feather accessories in his hair. Though the design doesn't really hint too much at anything besides the fact that Caesar has a doomed fate, as the two symbolic metaphors for angel wings are literally adorned across his head. Though now that we've covered the only real reason that people actually like Caesar, that being his design, let's talk about his character. In the overarching plot of Battle Tendency, Caesar plays the role of the foil to Joseph, though I actually feel that's what Araki was intending to go with, but he executed it very poorly, as Caesar is introduced as a cocky asshole, which is a nice spin on William, but is completely out of place when compared to the character he's supposed to be playing a foil to. Here, let me give you a quick summary of a character, and tell me if you know who I'm talking about right now. A cocky, hot-blooded Hamon user with a family name to live up to in the eyes of the reader must evolve his style in order to keep up with the gradually growing power scale of his enemies. He implements a stylish trick or a style into his fighting, so he can bridge the gap between him and his opponents. Now, who was I describing there? Joseph or Caesar? Trick question, it's both, because they're the same fucking character except for one's more of an asshole than the other. You see, this is the big issue with Caesar. He is introduced as a cocky asshole to play a foil to an already cocky but not as much of an asshole character. The worst thing about this is that they barely develop on him. He isn't like William, where you can argue that William is just Jonathan, but better. But William's point was to be the person that Jonathan would become later on, not someone who was supposed to oppose oppose him, because Araki doesn't seem to understand that a rivalry is a competition between someone with the same objective, not a competition with someone who's the same person. Though, their rivalry can only last so long, since they have to grow and develop with each other, which means they would have to form some sort of bond, right? Joseph and Caesar are supposed to go from these hard asses to these hardened war buddies, and us, the viewer, are supposed to see them as such, but that whole idea falls apart when the time they spent training is off screen. We aren't shown a bond between the two. We are just told a bond has been formed. Also, the moments in which we are shown them bonding on screen is the exact same moment. Here, let me summarize for you. Joseph does some crazy stunt in order to get to his objective, but that stunt leaves him in a situation where he is completely helpless to a deadly fall. Only for the last second, Caesar swoops in and rescues him. They have a small joke, and then they move on to the next scene. The worst part about this is that even in the second time, Joseph mentions that him and Caesar are finally becoming closer as people, that they finally get each other, only for the next goddamn chapter for Caesar to revert back to the goddamn character he was at the beginning of the fucking story. You see, Caesar's whole reason for hating Joseph and starting this whole rivalry is because he doesn't like the fact that Joseph doesn't understand his family history. Speedwagon even explains to Caesar that he did it on purpose as to spare Joseph from his possible fate. Caesar says that it's a lame excuse and that every man should know his family history. Now this is coming from Mr. Beat You With a Fucking Wrench, who thought his dad was a deadbeat, so he decided to kill his family name then drop it. This is Caesar, of all people, the person who should understand Joseph's perspective on his name. Also, let's not forget that Joseph is being very level-headed in the situation in which Caesar freaks out for no fucking reason. He isn't the one with a poison ring inside his gut. He has no reason to freak out, but he freaks out for the service of the plot, and not only that, but his freakout gets him killed, making his death feel forced and contrived, instead of a self-sacrificial one like William had, or his father had. Caesar was introduced as an asshole, he became slightly less of an asshole, and then he died an asshole. He's one of the most unlikable characters in all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and people seem to fucking love him because they hide all of this shitty character with a tragic backstory and a tragic death scene, which he lives up to everything he was supposed to be in his fucking story because he was just a walking power-up waiting to die, and you can tell this pretty obviously if you look at how Araki was writing part 1 and 2. So when Araki began writing JoJo, he originally had the idea for part 3 in his mind, though he realized that he would need to establish some sort of bloodline legacy for his main character, so he created Jonathan and his story. Jonathan was the JoJo created to be the pinnacle for all JoJos, the idea of justice and righteousness that he can mold all the JoJos from. So that means that he had a basic idea of parts 1 through 3 planned out when he was writing the original story of the Stone Mask. Though, when he originally killed off William Zeppeli, William mentions not having a son or a family to speak of, that Jonathan is his closest thing he's ever had to a family. Fans then pointed out to Araki that Caesar shouldn't exist because of this, which was then later retconned in later publications, but this means that when Araki was creating Caesar, he introduced him specifically with a last name that had a connection to death to it, meaning that Araki was literally creating a character with death on the mind, a character for him to kill off later. He even specifically symbolizes Caesar's death by giving him a crucifixion pose on Jejonium Volume 6, saying, "I wanted to convey a crucifixion, in other words, his future. Sort of a sense of preparedness for what's to come. I believe this represents the fate of the Zeppelis," meaning that in Araki's mind, that Zeppeli equals death for a character, further cementing that he created Caesar to do nothing but die. Also, a little more revealing on Caesar's memorability as a character, in the Jejonium for Caesar, the Volume 6 that I keep mentioning, Araki doesn't really remember Caesar much at all. This is given the fact that he goes on constant tangents throughout all of the Jejonium interview, which for most of the Jejoniums, Araki stays very on point when talking about a character. He only really remembers Caesar's design and not Caesar as a character because he liked the design in general. Also, if you notice, Caesar is lacking in the lovely Generation of the Joestar piece that Araki made, which had both William and Gyro in it, but no Caesar. And when it comes to Caesar, Araki doesn't seem to remember him at all. I know the joke that is, oh, Araki forgot. But this could actually be the fault of Caesar for being such a forgettable character. You see, Caesar is much like the bubbles that he uses. He's floaty, fragile, and fleeting in the minds of his creator and the viewers. And if you like this video and like to leave a longer lasting impact than Caesar ever did, head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/MattyNotTheBadGuy. And if you truly want to cement your name in the annals of time, be in history forever. You can head on over to Funimation.com/Shimonetta shows. You can head over to Funimation.com/show/Shimonetta, boring world where the concept of dirty jokes doesn't exist. Or go to Amazon.com and just type in Shimonetta and buy it. Do it now. And buy some bubbles.